And I'm back with the first episode of my new tournament review series. Now, as I mentioned in my last video, last week I played in the 2021 Pan American Intercollegiate Championship, which was my last tournament with the Rutgers chess team, as I just graduated in December. And the Pan Am Intercollegiate is the biggest college tournament of the year. It's typically held over the board, but this year, of course, precautions had to be taken, and it was online. And this meant a change in format. Typically, the tournament is 6 rounds, 90 minutes plus 30 seconds increment, standard classical time format. But this year, it was actually 9 rounds, game 25 plus 5, a rapid time format, which, ironically, would have been a lot better for me about 2 months ago when I was training rapid consistently. Ever since, I've switched more to classical chess, and switching back to a rapid time format was definitely tough. But anyway, we on the Rutgers chess team had a modest average rating of about 1990, just under 2000, which put us at the 33rd seed out of 61 teams. Now in round 1, we got thrown onto board 3, coming up against the Webster University B team. Now if you don't know anything about the collegiate chess scene, Webster is basically what Duke is to college basketball. Extremely strong chess program, won multiple national championships, and they had enough Grandmasters to field 2 teams, both of which were heavy favorites to win. And we got paired up against supposedly the weaker team, although they had an average USCF rating of 2660. And myself being on board 2, came up against Grandmaster Yuneski Quesada Perez, who is originally of Cuban descent, but has moved to the U.S. a long time ago, actually represented the U.S. Internationally. And he had a peak rating of around 2655. Now, what is he doing on a college team? That I couldn't even try to answer. They have actually a bunch of Grandmasters who are in their 30s, somehow playing on a college team. Anyway, and actually I found out that we were going to be playing Webster the night before, and concluded that I was going to be playing Quesada since he's their board 2. And so I did a little bit of database research to see what kind of openings he plays. I mean, coming up against a Grandmaster, I need the best possible preparation, and I quickly saw that he's a big e4 player. So I went and prepared well in every single possible line in my opening, whether it was the most solid line or the most sharp, risky line. Had no idea what he was going to play. And so let's see. So of course he opened with e4, and I went for d6. We have d4, knight f6, knight c3, knight b to d7, the lion defense. And now there's a lot of different ways why I can play this. I prepared them all, and he decided to go for just the solid main line with knight f3. I said, okay, e5, bishop c4, bishop e7, castles, c6, looking to try to play b5, but of course he's a Grandmaster, he's not going to allow this. a4, castles, h3, just kind of giving the king some room, and also preventing bishop g4 potentially in the future. And now I go b6, and the good thing about him playing into the main line is that, of course, I have a good amount of experience with this, so I didn't really have to think a lot on my moves. And also, this time format, if I didn't mention already, is extremely tough. It might feel like you have a lot of time, but you spend a couple minutes here, a couple minutes there, next thing you know, you're playing a blitz game. So I was just trying to play these moves as quickly as possible. If I could make simple moves that I knew were good, I was going to do that. And so I played b6, looking to expand on the queen side, as is the case in a lot of openings against e4. Black is looking to get queenside counterplay as quickly as possible. So he simply played rook e1 here. We have a6, and this is probably the first move that he really spent more than a couple seconds on, and he played b3. And now I'm not sure exactly if he's faced this opening. I mean, he's an extremely experienced Grandmaster. I'm sure he's faced this at some point, but even if he hadn't, he has enough experience that he would be able to figure out the best setup. And what people a lot of times do in this opening is go for something like bishop g5, but he realized that the bishop might be better off placed on this diagonal, where it's going to be putting pressure against my center. And this is honestly kind of what I was expecting, so I played rook b8. Now my idea here is to play b5, but if I play it right away, he can actually take here. And if I take, he can actually take because he has this pin. If I take the bishop, I actually lose the rook. So of course I had to play rook b8 first, sidestepping this pin. Now I'm ready to play b5. So he played bishop b2, and finally b5. And he could have taken the pawn, but he decided just to drop back. And I was still pretty much comfortable with this setup. I've played this kind of position a couple times before. I simply played queen c7 here, just adding protection to my center. And I'm looking to play c5, b4 at some point and try to push his pieces back. If I can generate enough counterplay, it's going to make it really difficult for him to get things going on the king side as he wants. So here he played knight e2, which is a very common maneuver in this position. First of all, it opens the bishop, and secondly, the knight wants to go to g3 and potentially to f5, which is a nice outpost square. If he can get there and cost my king side some problems, he's obviously going to do that. And now I played the move c5, which I thought was a very nice move here. I'm just trying to, again, expand on the queen side, and I'm actually threatening to play c4 to trap his bishop. So here he took my central pawn, I recaptured, and now he went into actually a very deep think. And honestly, this was probably my greatest achievement of this game, the fact that I was able to make a Grandmaster spend 7 minutes on this next move. I felt like I had accomplished something because at least he wasn't going to steamroll me easily. He was going to have to put that effort in. But what was he thinking about exactly here? Well, the position is not so easy. I mean, he wants to play something like knight g3 to get his knight to f5, but then I can simply play c4, and I'm attacking his bishop, and if it goes back, then I can even play pawn to c3, close out this bishop. Basically, my queenside expansion is starting to cause him some problems. So in this position, he sat and thought and thought and thought. I switched to the Zoom call briefly during this period. Of course, we had to be in a Zoom call with 2 camera angles. We had to have our microphone on. All the most highest standard kind of anti-cheating protocols that they could possibly enact were in place. So I kind of switched to the Zoom call, and he was sitting there like this, super focused. And after about 7 minutes, he played c4. Now, I was kind of expecting this. Obviously, he doesn't want to allow me to play c4, so he's going to play it himself. But on first glance, this looks a little bit odd, because can't I just take this pawn? And he obviously can't take this way, because then the bishop drops. And if he takes this way, well then isn't this just a free pawn? It looks like it at first, but I knew this can't be so easy. So in this position, I thought for a little bit and played b4. Ignoring the c-pawn, not going for any trades. And actually the reason I decided not to was because I knew that once I capture here, for example, takes, takes, and knight takes, I could be walking into very dangerous territory. And I didn't think a whole lot, not as long as him, and I just decided it was better to not test him and all the things that he had calculated. But for the sake of this video, I am going to reveal some of the post-game calculations that I did to see what, in fact, he had actually conjured up here. So let's switch this to White's perspective. So White just lost a pawn, but he did get his bishop onto a very nice diagonal, and he already has some pressure here. So in this position, what I thought that he would play is something like knight c1, opening an attack against my knight, but then I could simply play bishop b7, defending, and after he goes knight d3, trying to get 3 attackers, I could just play bishop f6. So this clearly was not what he had in mind. But what he may have actually had in mind was the move knight g3. And this now hits the knight twice, right? So knight basically has to take. I mean, if it goes back, then White will gladly pick up this pawn, and now all of his pieces are kind of active, and I could be in big trouble. So knight takes, and now it looks like, well, White is just going to take. He has double pawns, and Black might be in time to defend. But now knight takes e5. Leaving this knight here on g3. Keep in mind, White is down a piece in this position, and they don't care about this knight because there's something brewing here. And now Black has a couple different moves, but Black has to be super careful. The move I thought, what if Black just goes back with the knight, right? They're saving a piece. What could White possibly have here? Well, you can pause and try to figure out what they do have. I'm going to give you a clue. It's a pretty stunning move, and it requires quite a deep calculation. I mean, just the first move is not going to be enough. You just need to calculate this for as many moves as you possibly can, and even then it might not be enough, because we're testing a Grandmaster's calculation here. So this is some pretty serious stuff. But anyway, the move here that basically gives white a huge advantage is knight takes f7. A knight sacrifice. I mean, if I don't take it, then there's all sorts of discovered checks lined up. So rook takes. And now it's not so simple, because if you thought you can just take this rook and then make a fork here with your queen, I'm just going to go king g6. And if you try to give another check, I'm just going to block. And suddenly black is completely fine. They're up 2 pieces. Their king is actually safe behind all the knights. So in this position, the move is actually not bishop takes f7. It's rather queen to d5. Lining up this attack here. And the big problem for black is his queen is 2 pieces away from being able to protect the rook. If this knight wasn't in the way, they could move the bishop and then have some vision here, but it's not so easy. But then I thought, what if just knight d6, right? They're defending the rook. They're also putting pressure on the bishop. Now comes rook takes e7. White is capitalizing on this pin, taking a bishop, winning back the piece. And now I thought, well, what if black just plays bishop b7 here? They're attacking the queen. White is still down 1 piece. Looks like they have to move their queen somewhere, and they are going to move their queen. Queen takes f7 check. Basically, black has to take, otherwise they're getting checkmated. Takes, and now, kind of a calm move, rook takes f7. Seems like there's no way this works. I mean, white is down a rook for a queen, but look at these pieces. Look at the bishops, look at the rook. And the black pieces are all kind of bunched up over here, a little bit far away from the king. And in this position, white is actually threatening rook takes d7 with a discovered check against the king. So black would have to play queen c6, actually lining up their own mate threat. But now, watch what unfolds. Check. Check. King has to go to e8. If he goes to g8, then check. And I'm taking the queen. So king goes here. And now check. And now simply white can play the stunning move f3. Blocking the queen and bishop. No more checkmate threats. And now if we look at the material, white has 2 bishops and 2 rooks against black's queen, rook, and bishop, which mathematically is almost similar, but in reality, white is completely crushing here because the black king is completely open. Black pieces are discoordinated, and white is just going to maybe pick up this pawn, bring in the bishops. Black is just basically dead in the water here. Now, how deep did the Grandmaster actually see all this? It's kind of impossible to say. Maybe he only saw it a few moves ahead and his intuition was strong enough to tell him that he had something. Maybe he actually calculated it like 10 or 15 moves deep and saw that he had a concrete win. I'll never know, but the point is that I probably made a good practical choice by not taking the pawn and going into all that. So I simply played b4, which ducks all that, but it also closes my position, and I have less space, so it's going to be a little bit tough. And if he spent 7 minutes on that move, c4, he did not spend probably more than 7 seconds on any of the rest of his moves. And just watch what he starts to do here. He plays knight g3, of course looking to get into f5, and so I play rook e8, so that I can bring my bishop back now. Queen c2, I attack his knight. He goes to e3, which he would have done anyway, because now he wants to get into d5. This is like the juiciest square on the board for his pieces. He has obviously 2 pawns protecting it, so it's an ideal square. I go bishop g7 to try to add protection to the pawn once the knight moves, and here we have knight d5. And now I was faced with a big practical choice. I can take the knight, or I can move the queen. Obviously, my queen's under attack. And it's not so easy to know what to do here. After about a few minutes of thinking, I decided that the knight was just too annoying on d5, but this turned out to be my first big mistake. What I really should have done was just move the queen here, and then after a couple more moves, I mean, my position would be pretty cramped here, but he doesn't really have a simple way to break through. I mean, I'm just kind of staying solid. But I thought that I could just maybe get rid of the knight, and I knew that if he takes with this pawn, then I have the move f5, and now I'm actually better because I'm threatening to play e4. He doesn't have a lot of pawns in the center anymore. But he took with the c-pawn, and suddenly it becomes apparent that this c4 square is now a big asset for him. He's going to go knight d2, knight c4, and he's going to be a lot better. So in this position, I played a5 because my idea was to go knight b6, and I didn't want him to kick my knight. But now he goes rook d1. I go queen d6 to blockade this pawn. But now he goes bishop b5, a move that was not possible just 2 moves ago because I had a pawn here. But I decided to push it forward, and he instantly sees how he can take advantage of this. He's now hitting my knight, which is now pinned because of the rook. And he's going to leverage this pin to try to get his knight to c4, kick my queen, and then start pushing his pass pawn. All very simple for him. And in this position, I made another mistake. I played bishop f8. I was already starting to get low on time. I had already less than 10 minutes. And I was already starting to anticipate the attack. Not really an attack, but sort of the positional maneuvers that he was going to throw at me. What I really should have played was rook to e7 just to get out of this pin. But this is kind of an awkward move to see and to play in a rapid game. It just didn't even occur to me that I should do this. And now he plays knight to d2, which, again, I saw coming, but was sort of powerless to stop because I can't put my knight here. He'll take my rook. And so in this position, I was already feeling very much under pressure. Didn't know what to do, so I decided to make a big risk and sacrifice my rook for his bishop. I thought if I can at least get rid of his bishop, which is pinning my knight, maybe I can sort of salvage things and kind of patch up my holes. So he took. I went queen b8, thinking that, okay, I gave up a rook for a bishop, but I'm going to pick up this pawn. But now after knight c4 and queen takes, he simply goes rook a1. I basically helped to open his a file, and he's going to take advantage. How am I now saving this a pawn? 2 attackers, can't bring in another defender. That pawn's a goner. So I go bishop a6, he took, I drop back, he brought in his other rook, all so simple stuff. Like, he was blitzing these moves out in 2 seconds, and I have no defense. I could have played rook a8 here, but I felt like this is too passive. I'm just asking to be pinned. So I decided to take. He took. I attacked his queen. He played queen b5. And at this point, I just realized how insanely awful my position was and resigned the game because my rook is under attack. If the rook moves, he can take this pawn. He's going to bring in these rooks. I mean, he's just going to play rook a7, force my queen back. He's just going to slowly suffocate me, and there was no real point in playing on here. So I resigned and succumbed to a very experienced Grandmaster in about 31 moves. And predictably so, the rest of the team also lost their games. They all had very tough opponents. They fought the way they could, but eventually we lost the first match 4-0. So now we move on to round 2, and we're up against the Caltech B team, who also lost their first game, so they're not playing us. And I was actually playing black again because I was now on board 1. Now, our team consisted of 5 players, but only 4 play each round. So, me being the captain, I basically figured out kind of a rotation where everyone, except for one person, would play 7 rounds. One person played 8 rounds. And our board 1, I decided to give him a rest in the second round since I kind of anticipated that we were going to lose our opening round. And so I hopped onto board 1. And I'm playing a much rated player, actually almost 1,000 points lower rated than my opening round opponent, who was, of course, a GM. So game should be easier, right? Well, we'll just see about that. So my opponent opened with e4. I went d6. Same stuff. But now my opponent played bishop d3. And I did a little bit of kind of prep. I looked up his opening database, and I knew that he was playing this move. And so I'm like, okay, I faced this move before, no problem, e5. But now he decided to surprise me a little bit. I don't know if he did some research against my kind of opening database and saw what I play and knew that I never faced this move, or if this was just something that he kind of plays already, d5. Kind of odd, because to me, the main moves in this position are c3 and knight f3. d5 looks kind of weird because you're kind of closing your bishop behind these pawns, but at the same time, it takes a lot of space in the center, and you can then back that up with c4, so it's not necessarily a bad move. But it did kind of throw me off, and in this position, I debated playing c6, but then I thought, okay, he's just going to play c4 anyway, so I decided to start with knight d7, just to wait to see what he does. And he played c4. So I now played knight c5. Now I'm hitting this pawn twice. And I'm also hitting his bishop. So he has to defend the pawn first of all. He plays knight c3. And now I could have simply taken his bishop. But I thought, my knight's pretty good on c5. His bishop is not very good behind this pawn. What should I take it for? I'm just going to play a5 and stop him from playing b4, lock in my knight on this nice c5 square, and I should be fine. He said, okay, you're not going to take my bishop. I'm going to drop back and preserve it. It lives on to fight another day. So I go bishop e7. He goes h3. Maybe a useful move to stop bishop g4. Maybe not. Whatever. I castle. He goes bishop e3. Attacking my knight. And I didn't really want him to take and then have to take this way, so I played b6. He played knight e2. And at this point, I started to realize that this is really not such an easy position. Not only have I never sort of seen this exact structure, but I don't really know how to complete my development because I have a lot less space, so what I ideally want to do is be able to break with f5. But if I simply drop my knight back, he can just go g4, and now I can't get f5 in because he obviously has two defenders. If I go g6, he'll go rook g1. And now I still can't go f5 because my king will end up in the line of fire. So what do? I thought for a little while, and I decided to play king h8. Now the idea of this is to now retreat my knight temporarily to g8, and then try to play f5, and maybe even go g6, f5, because my king is now no longer on the g file if he ever plays rook g1. So I thought this would be kind of a good way to push back against his space advantage. He simply castled. He was actually playing the opening super quickly. I don't know if he was just in blitz mode or if he had prepped this really well, but he was just playing extremely fast. And I played knight g8, thinking that I was going to just go with my plan, and he immediately played f4, just going right at me. He's lower rated by like 150 points. He doesn't care. He's trying to knock my head off. And so my first instinct is, can I just play f5 here? But turns out I can't, because then he takes on e5. And now if I take, he just takes here. And he's now defending the pawn. I'm just down. So I didn't do that. I took first. And he took with the knight. And now I decided to pin his knight by bringing my bishop to g5. Only now he played the move queen h5, and it started to occur to me that I could be in huge trouble, because the move that he is now threatening, if I just make some random move, for example, like let's say I just try to develop the bishop, right? What is he going to play here? He has the move e5, and suddenly he's threatening checkmate on h7. Whoa, I didn't see this coming several moves ago. So in this position I played h6, making sure that if he plays e5, I'm not going to be necessarily in the line of fire. But in this position he thought for a few minutes, and guess what he played? e5 anyway. And as he was thinking, I was also starting to realize, wait, this might actually be a possibility. And the idea is he's opening the bishop, and he's really trying to key in on the light squares around my king. As a result of me putting the king on h8 and putting the knight on g8, my king is kind of trapped in the corner, not a lot of wiggle room, and he can really try to drill me on these light squares. And there was a lot of calculations that I had to do. Obviously, the first thing I have to do is see if I can take the pawn, which, spoiler alert, I did end up doing. But before I could do that, there was a lot of things I had to make sure were okay. in order for me to not literally lose on the spot. Because after this move, one calculation was, what happens if he plays knight to g6 check? It actually looks really good at first because it's hitting the king, obviously. And if pawn takes, queen takes, and suddenly he has this battery lined up, he's one move away from giving me checkmate. But I actually realized that it wouldn't quite work for him because, well, first of all, I can take the bishop, and now I have the move e4. And I shut down his queen-bishop battery, and if he takes the knight, this gives me enough time to do something like this, attack his queen, force it back, and I'm going to be safe. But still, this was very worrying. There was a lot of things going on here. And I thought that I had everything under control, but then he surprised me with the move bishop takes c5. Very nice move, the best in the position, because now, suddenly, if we look at the same position, if I take, now this move does work. Because now I don't have e4. He'll simply take. And how am I stopping checkmate right here? I have to like sacrifice my bishop, and then sacrifice my rook, and then I'm down a whole bunch of material, and I'm still losing. So in this position, I had to just accept that I had underestimated his attack and took the knight, giving up the rook. And now I'm down the exchange, but it's not so easy for him. I mean, the engine will say that he's much better, but he still has to find a breakthrough. And in this position, he sort of faltered. The move that would have given him really good chances to put me away was the move g3, which attacks the bishop, sacrificing a pawn, with the idea to take on f7. And if he can get rid of that pawn and penetrate like this, I'm going to be pretty much defenseless. But he didn't see that move, and actually, to be fair, I would have been able to check here first and then maybe bring my knight to f6, but still, it was the best move for white. But he instead played knight e4. And this allowed me to play f5. And now he moved his knight back, and I played bishop d7. And I'm still worse, but I'm slowly starting to consolidate my position. He goes back with the knight, check, and I go knight e7. Developing my knight, I'm preparing to play g6, kick his queen back, seal up the defenses, and fight on. He plays rook f3, attacking the bishop, but I just drop back. And now suddenly, he has to be super careful because if he, for example, brings his other rook in the game, I can actually go g6, and his queen is trapped. So in this position, he played rook to g3, making space for his queen to come back. But now, I'm actually able to trap his rook, and he can't save it. So just like that, I'm starting to turn the game around. I'm not even taking the rook right away. I'm simply improving my position. Now I take, and now this is the move that I was most proud of in this game. Knight to c8. The idea is my knight on e7 was no longer so good, and I want to play e4 at some point. So my idea is to get the knight to c8, then bring it to d6, where it's going to be blunting the queen's view, also hitting c4, and it's just going to be a really good piece. So it gets to d6, I play e4, and I'm really starting to turn the tables. Even though my time is getting relatively low, I'm feeling a little bit more confident. I survived his attack, I'm up a pawn, and look at these pawns. They're starting to close out his bishop. If I keep pushing, this one could be in danger of promoting. He has to be careful. He played knight e2, and I played king h7, just anticipating the fact that he's going to go to f4 and hit this pawn on g6. So he goes on knight f4, I go rook g8, just trying to be super solid. He goes rook d1, and I go queen e5, now creating this pin here. So he goes back with the queen, well, sliding over to e3. I go rook e8, g3, g5, attacking his knight. He goes knight h5, which is a big risk because this knight is close to my king, but is it ever going to be able to get back? And I sort of called his bluff. I played king g6. I'm not scared. I'm attacking the knight with my king. He has to defend it. He goes queen e2. I played f4. I'm getting really low on time at this point. I had like maybe 1 or 2 minutes, but I felt like I was so close, like I'm right around the corner of winning. But then he took. And right at this point, I actually saw my clock. It dropped under a minute, and like this little notification went off. And it kind of like sent me almost into shock, which really shouldn't have happened because I play a lot of blitz. I'm usually pretty good in time scrambles, but I just somehow like kind of panicked. And I played the move g takes f4. And believe it or not, by just taking this pawn, I go from completely winning to the position basically being equal. Because if I had just stayed calm, I would have seen that I don't need to take this pawn. I can actually just slide my queen to f5. And now I'm threatening to take on h3, and his king is just so vulnerable. What does he do here? In this position, he would have had to play something like knight to g3, obviously trying to save the knight, but then I take, and if he blocks, we can trade queens. I win this pawn, and look at this. 2 pass pawns. I just push them, and I win. Very simple. But I saw that my queen is under attack. I saw that he has a pawn here. I said, well, why not take it? But now this allows rook to g1 check, and my king is suddenly in the line of fire. I go back, and in this position, he could have even played rook to g7. But then after I give up my queen for the 2 pieces, it's a little bit unclear because even though he has the queen, I have still these pawns. Not so easy for him, so he decided to play queen g2, actually threatening a checkmate in 2 moves, right? Like check and checkmate. Obviously, I saw this. I played bishop f5, guarding the square. But now he found a very nice move here, taking advantage of my overloaded queen, which is busy guarding g7. Knight takes f4. And if I take the knight, this is mate. And with about 45 seconds on my clock, this kind of tilted me. I was like, whoa, I just lost the pawn. Now I'm not even better anymore. What if I lose this game? I need to protect checkmate on g7. Played the move rook e7. Which does defend g7, but there's a very small problem. Boom. And just like that, I went from losing to winning to lost, checkmated in 1 move. That's what happened. Blunder, checkmate in 1 in the time scramble. Got caught off by the knight takes f4. Didn't know what to do, and just completely overlooked the fact that by moving my rook up, I was no longer defending the g8 square, and blundered mate in 1. So, yeah. I wasn't even really angry. Like, a lot of times, I'm pretty angry at myself for blundering this. I was just kind of in a state of shock, like, at how this had happened. Luckily, it didn't affect our team, because the 3 boards below me all were able to win their game, so we still won the match 3-1. But that was a really rough start for me. Day 1, I finished 0-2. Okay, the first game was against the Grandmaster. Can't really expect to win that one, but this one, I had good chances towards the middle and end stage of the game, but made a couple of dumb decisions under time pressure and just suddenly lost the game. But that's just the opening 2 games. Whole lot more action coming from day 2. Stay tuned.